Good morning and good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to another recap here on the C Squared channel. Guys, we have just an incredible day of chess, but also an incredible day of drama at the World Championship match between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren. There was a prep leak. We have some experience with that as well, and we will address it shortly. Fabi, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world right now. How are you feeling? What do you think about today's game? And what do you think about the incredible drama that just unfolded?
Yeah, it's evening here, and today is my last day as a spectator of the event, and tomorrow I'll be assuming my role as a commentator for the remainder of the match for Chess.com for their broadcast team, alongside Tanya Sachdev, Robert Hess, and I believe also Danya Naroditsky will be doing some of the rounds. And yeah, I mean, you said it yourself. The Today was eventful not only in terms of the chess, which was certainly one of the most exciting and unpredictable games that we've had, and that's saying a lot because we've had a lot of unpredictable games, but also in terms of the stuff that happened outside of the actual game, which was something we'll get into in another video besides this recap, because I think it really deserves, and also we probably want to talk about it quite a bit, and it's a very interesting and dramatic topic. The prep leak, right? And
Yes.
we'll get into that in a bit.
Yes.
But
So basically, just to kind of give the people a very short rundown before we record a much lengthier episode about it, because we do have a lot of things to analyze. Ding's account, potentially secret account on both chess.com and Lichess, has been leaked, supposedly. Ding, by the way, himself said that that's not the case, but we will get into that and how the players and how you reacted to the leak in 2018 as well. There's some behind the scenes stuff that is happening right now. We will be discussing that in a later video, but it's just going to take too much time. So we should probably get right into the game.
yeah, so let's start with the first moves. So Ding with the white pieces, Jan with the black pieces, and we know that Ding is coming off a very unfortunate loss. And so for sure he wanted to strike back in this game, and we've already seen him strike back several times in this match, in fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Immediately bouncing back from the loss with a win, and certainly with the white pieces, and with the match slowly nearing its final course, he would want to win this game.
Yes.
And he played an exciting line. I think it's a good line for definitely for a must-win situation, but it's also a line where you take some risks. So you have to balance that out. I want to win, and I am playing something which could, if I'm not in form, if I'm playing badly, which could backfire.
Yes.
So he played the Nimzo, d4, knight of 6, c4, e6, knight c3. This invites the Nimzo Indian. The funny thing is that Jan also invited the Nimzo Indian earlier in the match in game 3, and Ding declined that invitation by playing third move d5, going for Carlsbad structures or Queen Gambit declined variations. So Jan decided to go for the Nimzo with bishop to b4.
Accept the Nimzo.
And we can only speculate. We can only speculate about what Jan wanted with the white pieces here. It would have been funny if he wanted the same thing that Ding played in this game.
Yes.
Certainly, the thing is, the direction that Ding played, and we'll see in a second, is one of the most topical directions. So it wouldn't come as a surprise for Jan. So you're not trying to catch your opponent off guard from the very beginning, because everyone knows that these Samish lines, or pseudo Samish lines, are a topic or a direction for people to explore. And I've seen a lot, like Abdusattorov played recently against Wesley. I've played this line quite a bit. Magnus has played this quite a bit. So definitely both of them this was in their, let's say, research or area that they were familiar with.
Yeah.
So Ding played e3.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of known as the Rubinstein variation, and we'll remind that a3 on fourth move is called the Samish variation. But the way that Ding played e3, short castle, of course not the only move, but the most popular one. And now a3.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of like a Samish. It's super similar and very often transposes. But I don't know if it has a name or if it's considered some sort of pseudo sandwich variation.
I'm seeing it on chess.com actually right now, and the name is quite funny. It's called the normal line, which
Well,
makes no sense, obviously, but yes. Um, you said it yourself. You would be surprised if it has a name, but it's the normal line.
I was only really introduced to it last year
Okay.
when I played it. I was playing with the black pieces, and there were these online rapid tournaments,
Yes.
right? And I faced Grishuk, and he plays this line against me, and I take. I play b6 because it's supernatural to play b6. I think most uninitiated people just play b6.
Hmm.
You can also play c5. You can play d6. You have an abundance of choice, but I played b6, bishop d3, bishop b7, and 8 f3, c5 e4,
Hmm.
and knight e8. Uh, it's kind of playable what I did,
Hmm.
but I soon came under very strong pressure. Grishuk was well prepared. I basically attribute this whole line to Grishuk for that reason. Although, if we look at like who came up with it first, obviously there is Akiba Rubinstein from the early 1900s. After all, the E3 variation is named after him, and a lot of other very strong players, world champions, and so on, in the mid 1900s. But from like modern chess, it's not real. It hasn't been popular, and then it suddenly, I think, got revitalized.
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, you'll find strong players who occasionally essay this, but I think from modern chess, Grishuk is the person that I would kind of point to um, as like the guy who, at least who I noticed it from, and who kind of popularized it in 2022. It's very recent.
Yes, yes. Nepo did deviate quite quickly. Instead of the b6 that you just mentioned, he played the move d6, which is, as you also pointed out, one of the topical lines. This is something that he mentioned in the press conference as well. He said that he more or less, not necessarily expected, but he was ready for this specific variation as well. So perhaps he prepared it with white pieces also.
Yeah, well, it's d6 is the first computer move. The thing is, black can also play c5, and this is kind of directly bishop d3. White plays usually knight c6. This directly transposes to the main classical line of Zamesh variation, but white avoided some of black's options.
Yeah.
So this could explain why white plays e3 followed by a3 rather than fourth move a3 immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The downside, of course, is that white gives black an extra option, which is the d6 line,
Yes.
which is what the computer kind of likes. And so, brief history of this line, because I also, at some point after Grishuk played against me, I basically took it up and I played a bunch of games with it. I played it, for example, against Magnus in Blitz, and I got an advantage, although the game eventually ended in a draw. I played it in a rapid game against Martinez Alcantara, known as Jospin online,
Mm-hmm.
famous top Blitz player.
Very good player.
And so
yes.
Grishuk's initial idea after d6 was to play bishop to d3 here. Very natural. Black plays e5. Obviously, black would be very happy to gain more space with e4, so white plays e4. And he played this against Hans Niemann. And in this position, black played ed4, cd4, and knight takes e4. And because if white takes, there's rook e8 followed by f5, winning the bishop back, black is not actually sacrificing a piece, but is in fact winning a pawn. And so white's idea is to sacrifice knight to e2 after knight takes e4. And white has compensation, but it's not enough for an advantage. It's only enough for sort of complicated game.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that bishop d3 was, even though that was the initial idea of Grishuk, it was sort of discarded
aside.
after that.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's pretty clear that after e5, white does not have much room for creativity. It's more like it's a forced line, and you kind of get what you get.
Yeah.
That's why I played the move f3 here 3 times, including against Magnus, because f3 is a move where there's a lot of room for creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because although the computer doesn't like this move very much, basically black has an abundance of choice. e5, c5, knight h5 is what Magnus played against me, knight d7, knight c6. The list goes on and on. And because of that choice, it's a little bit unpleasant for black.
Yeah.
It's kind of easier practically for your opponent if they have a straight line to go to.
Mm-hmm.
When all moves look equivalent or similar, then usually people go wrong. And I've seen that in this position. Usually people go wrong with black. So that's why I was very attracted to this line. And I was very successful with this. I won 2 games, and I drew Magnus from a position of strength. So
was this in classical games, or did you play this only in rapid games?
I played two rapid games. I beat Martinez Alcantara and I beat Vokirov, and I drew Magnus in a blitz game.
But no
Where he
classical
played.
games.
No. I didn't play this in classical. I'm not saying that it's not playable in classical. I think it is, but it's a little bit risky
Yeah.
in classical because you know White does take a lot of strategic risk here because of doubled c pawns. The c4 pawn in particular is very, very vulnerable.
Mhm.
And very often the computer plays this in ways which, for white, as well as for black, but also for white, in ways which are not really easy to comprehend.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a way to get a good game, like a good fight, especially in rapid. And the hope in rapid is that your opponent will misplay it because they don't have much time to think. A lot of people, for example, play like c5 or
After
play
f3,
e5.
right?
Yeah, after f3 they play e5, for example,
Mhm.
e4 and c5. Like two people did this against me. Simply just not very good. It's the reason why grandmasters would play like this is because they want to sort of get a closed position where they can maneuver and they won't get blown away on the king side.
Mhm.
The downside is like you kind of start to get pressed for space after d5,
Yeah.
knight e8, and then g4, and basically you don't achieve f5. It looks bizarre, like white doesn't move any pieces, just pawns. But if black doesn't get f5, black is completely cramped and ends up with without any active ideas, and white starts to gain space, h4, h5, etc.
Yeah.
So, just brief history of this line. Ding played another move.
He played knight to e2.
He played knight to e2. Not really, like computers on low depths don't like this move. But once you analyze it, if you get like a super strong engine, basically they say, yeah, it's a perfectly playable move. And also very tricky for black. And the funny thing is we were like kind of streaming this title Tuesday, right? And our last game was against Aram Hakobian.
Yes. Did he play this line against you?
It was basically this line. I'm not. Did he start with 92 or did he start with Bishop
I don't
D3?
remember exactly, but
But I mean, he plays this line. Like he played 92 against me in the Rapid and Blitz. Oh no, it's not the Rapid and Blitz.
in the Blitz event,
American
St.
Cup
Louis.
Blitz.
Yeah.
Last round, and I won that game, but I misplayed it. I played e5,
Mhm.
knight g3,
Mhm.
because I was thinking it's like bishop d3. So I was thinking, oh, okay, d6. Now I'm playing e5, right? I wasn't familiar with it. I thought e5 was idea. But in fact, after e5, knight g3, computer doesn't like black's position.
Mm.
I played rook e8, and now, for example, computer says f3 followed by e4. F3 is kind of a funny move, but you want to play e4. If you play e4 immediately, you lose your pawn. So that's why you start with f3, then you play e4, and you try to pin the knight on f6. We'll see similar themes in the game.
Mhm.
And this is rather interesting for white, if
Mhm.
not just promising.
Mhm.
So Jan was familiar with this line. He played c5. It's the correct move.
Knight to g3.
Knight to g3, obviously the knight was going there. That's where knight e2 is kind of forecasting that you want to play knight g3, e4, and bishop on to g5 at some point.
Yeah.
Knight to c6, very logical. One nuance about this position. If white starts with e4 now, black has a move which is either surprising to the uninitiated or to people who have analyzed the line, is a very familiar idea. Black plays d5.
Allowing
You don't
e5.
You allow e5 and then you put the knight on e4. And the justification for this is that white has spent a lot of time either moving pawns or moving the knight. And black has a great development advantage. So once the position opens, it's great. Usually we have this like principle in chess. Bishops favor open positions, knights favor closed positions. But here the more relevant factor is the development. White's king is in the center, opening the position should logically, for that reason, should favor black because black's king is castled and white's king is not. So white cannot play e4 prematurely.
Yes.
Now, preparing e4 is not so easy. Like you would think bishop to d3, but after b6, now you can't play e4 so easily. I mean, you can kind of do it. You can always sack this pawn, but here it's not very promising for white.
Yeah.
Because e4 obviously drops the d4 pawn. And so, again, white will have to take time to try to prepare e4, and it turns out that white will be taking too much time.
Yeah.
So this explains the bizarre move that Ding played, which was certainly the result of preparation, but would never come to mind over the board. I mean, a human plays bishop d3, a human plays e4, bishop e2 maybe, something like that, but you don't play the move rook a2, which is what Ding played, unless you analyze the position.
Yeah.
And in this position, it's also been played before. Again, we mentioned Aram Hakobian, who is an Armenian Grandmaster, and we mentioned that he played a similar line against me. He played Rook A2 here.
He played
And he
Rook
played
A2. Okay.
he played Rook A2 against Maksudlu in the Air Things Master Play-in, so quite an important event.
Yeah.
That's the qualification event for like the Division 1, Division 2 of the what's called the Champions Chess Tour, I guess is the name.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
Champions Chess Tour, and I believe that was the first qualification tour which happened in January or February or something like that.
So this idea is known, Rook A2. It was played. Levon Aronian tweeted that Aram Hakobian had shown him some of these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And Rook A2 is a very strange move, but basically it's kind of a waiting move, but a semi-useful waiting move. Like the rook very often is coming to D2. It might look like, why would you put the rook on D2 now? But we're not talking about right away. We're talking about after white plays E4, bishop G5, the rook may very often come to D2. It may very often come to the king side. And you wouldn't be able to foresee this in human play.
Yeah.
But when you're analyzing, of course, these themes come into effect. So Rook A2 is basically modern chess analysis.
Yes.
The other funny thing is that if black plays Queen A5 here, which kind of comes to mind, right? You just attack C3.
Sure.
White's probably best move is Rook D2. And basically, if Queen takes C3, and then you always have Bishop to B2 stuff. And black doesn't want to go for that because then the bishop on the long diagonal will be very strong.
Yeah.
So Rook D2, it's a very bizarre idea. It's like pure modern chess analysis based on modern engines.
Yeah.
That's the only way to describe it.
Without the engines, nobody would ever think about this type of plans and ideas in this specific position. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Rook A2, Rook D2. That's just
And also,
as we call it,
this,
alien chess.
Yeah, you can call it alien chess. You can call it engine chess. But I think it's just modern chess. This is how people analyze because, I mean, you have to find ideas and straightforward paths usually lead to equality. So if you want to outplay your opponent, if you want to outprepare your opponent, you have to go for this vague and unclear and confusing stuff.
Yeah.
Jan played B6. Logical move, also first line of the engine, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Now Ding played E4. Now the
Still-
same idea with D5 is no longer good. Because, for example, D5, CD5, ED5, E5, knight E4, and now simply rook to C2. And we see how this rook has like multiple purposes, right? The C3 pawn was attacked, and the rook on A1 would have been unable to defend it, but now we play rook C2.
Yeah.
And we follow up with like F3, we try to get rid of the knight on E4, and then white has some positional trumps, the two bishops, the center, and potential to maybe attack down the H file if the trade of knights on G3 occurs and
Yeah.
Hg3 and the H file opens.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
bishop to A6 was played. Logical. You're attacking C4. Basically, you want to continue with knight to A5, and you take that pawn. It's a common theme in all these Samish positions. Is white has the center, white has the two bishops, but white has to deal with potentially losing a very important pawn on C4.
C4. Yeah. Yeah. And not only that you lose it, but once that bishop manages to get to C4, you also threaten to exchange the light square bishops, which would be devastating for white's attacking potential.
Yeah,
That's a
that's an
problem.
important point. That black's bishop on C8 was not a very good piece. It didn't contribute to the position.
Mhm.
If black trades it off for the bishop on F1, which very often is an attacking piece on D3, bearing down on H7,
Yeah.
then it's not always the case that is good for black, but in a vacuum, it would be a good trade for black for sure.
Yeah. Bishop
So-
G5.
Yeah, again, pinning the knight, and now we're threatening knight H5 stuff. We're threatening E5 stuff. If
Immediate
knight to
threats.
A5, knight H5 basically followed by anything taken on F6 would be disastrous for black, both tactically, positionally, everything.
Yeah.
So black cannot continue with knight to A5 because, I mean, just knight H5 and you threaten bishop F6 and queen G4 and you just lose the game.
Yeah.
So black has to play H6. There's no other way to break the pin.
Mhm.
And now if white goes back bishop H4, then G5. There are some positions in other similar lines of Zamish where white can sack the bishop on H4 just to get the lines open, but white needs to be castled for that to happen.
Yeah.
Because white needs to like play F4 and then have the rook on F1, and the knight shouldn't be on G3. A lot of factors need to be the case for white to be able to do this.
Yeah.
So Ding played the absolutely forced move. You can't take on f6. If you take, then all of the like positional advantages you had are gone, and all the negative stuff in your positions remains there.
Yeah.
Like don't have the two bishops, you don't have the attack, but you have d4, c4 weak, and so on.
You just spent a lot of time moving your pawns and the knight for one purpose only, and that was to continue the attack, and your attack is finished. Strategically,
Yeah,
at this point, you're busted.
exactly. Like the white is all in.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work for white tactically, then basically your position falls apart.
Yeah.
That's why you need to analyze this position. You can't just go into it over the board. You need to know that here you can play h4.
Which
It's not, which he did. It's not automatic that white plays h4. And so in this position, basically, again, you're saying, if you play, for example, knight to a5, I will have some tactics. In this case, the tactics are e5, take on e5, and knight to e4. Actually, white has other things as well, but this is like a very direct tactic, which works out for white.
So let's say if you go knight a5, can you go e5 right now?
Yeah, e5 take and knight e4 is a tactic.
Mm-hmm.
Like the computer prefers knight a5, rook d2, with the idea to play e5. So okay, there's multiple ways, basically, in which black can't be concerned with the c4 pawn. At the moment, the action is on the king side, so you can't be distracted with knight a5.
Yeah.
And so in the like leaked prep, which we'll I think get into, there was a game that was played that was revealed where black played rook to e8 here.
Yeah.
And I think white won that game rather quickly, but we'll probably get into it in the other analysis.
Yes, if we don't link it somewhere here, we will at some point add it in the description, or just make sure you're subbed so that you get the notification whenever we release that video, which will be shortly after this one for sure.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing is in the press conference, Jan mentioned that he had all of this in his file.
He was ready.
So this was analyzed by both players.
Yes.
They were both in their book, but I think that they might not have remembered all the details because chess is huge and you have so much to analyze, and it's not like you can keep everything in your head perfectly. So what I suspect is that they both knew this position. They both basically knew which moves are playable for black, and but they didn't remember every detail with pristine clarity, especially because black can play two versions of a position which look very similar. One is that first you take on d4, cd4, then you take on g5 and play g6, gf6, queen f6. And this is basically like we had in the game, but Jan didn't take on d4. He played the same position with the c pawns, c5 and c3 still on the board.
Yeah.
And so these positions look similar, but they are different. It's which makes it very, very difficult both to analyze, to understand, and to also remember. So there's a lot of risk that white takes when choosing this because it's very confusing. And black basically shouldn't just know these lines because it's very risky for black as well. So Jan took on g5, and it's pretty clear, I think, that if the knight moves anywhere, let's say to d7, then after queen to h5, you just f6. And then an important kind of idea to keep in mind for people is that the mating net is maintained with g6 here, right?
Yeah.
Very typical sort of attacking ideas that you'll see in, for example, basically any opening, right? Where like the Grunfeld, you'll see these kinds of ideas, right? When the H file opens.
Yeah. And the king doesn't have enough time to run. The rook is on f8, cutting its escape route.
Yeah, you can see this in the Petrov, you can see this in the Scotch, like a million openings where the H file opens, and then the only question is black in time to get the king out of the way or to get pieces into defense?
Yeah.
And here Jan played a very typical move and a good one. He played g6.
Which once again, he probably knew. Like he played g6 pretty much instantaneously. Not that he has a lot of options, but
he said that he knew the position was good for black.
Yes.
So he may not have remembered if you take on d4 or not, but he definitely knew that you can play like this.
Yeah.
Which obviously his preparation is at a very high level because he's playing a world championship match, and he's played one recently, so he's playing 2 world championship matches, and that you don't do that. You don't play matches without having a great deal of opening knowledge and preparation.
Yeah.
So after g6, which by the way is the idea simply that now we can move the knight without having to worry about queen h5, and we're also preparing king g7 to be able to contest the h file with rook h8.
Mhm.
So a multi-purpose move. And here, Ding played one move. The commentators I was watching were very intrigued with the move f4 here.
F4. Okay. So you just want to maintain the pawn on g5 as is and try to say that's worth more than knight on f6.
There's a bunch of reasons for this move. There's a bunch of purposes. One is that the pawn eventually might come to f5. For example, if the knight moves to d7, queen g4, king g7, now white has this f5 move. That's one idea behind the move f4. That the the f1 can also be used as an attacking piece because the rook can come behind to f2. The rook on a2, again, is a very important attacking piece for white. The other idea is that white is preparing d5 and the knight can't come to e5. So some other ideas there.
Right.
And this would certainly lead to complex play. Black would take on d4 most likely. And it actually doesn't seem like white really tests black so much here, because it seems like computer says you should take on f6 now. Queen takes f6, and it doesn't look like white is playing for an advantage here. It more looks like white is trying to hold the game together with some tactics.
It doesn't seem like also f4 has improved white's position. Rather, the king became much weaker on e1. Also, the knight on g3 a bit unstable at this point.
Yeah, and so I understand why Ding didn't want to go for it, but also it is a very attractive move because when you usually sack a piece for this open h-file attack, you do it for the attack, and taking on f6 is kind of admitting that, at least for the moment, the attack is not going to lead to checkmate.
Yeah.
On the other hand, white is restoring the material balance, so obviously g takes f6 can be a bad move, and it's what Ding played, and I think it was still his preparation.
Yes. Queen takes f6, and now e5.
E5, yeah, white. The thing is, white has so many moves that I don't think that we can get into all the details, but for example, one move is rook to d2. And here black has so many moves that it's difficult for me to even say what the most natural or best move is. But it remains a complex position.
Yeah.
But Ding's move is more direct, and it would kind of come to mind more to me to play the move that he played, which is e5.
D takes e5.
Now, Jan mentioned in the press conference that he was considering two moves here. One was a move he played, and one was a move which loses on the spot. So it's good for him he didn't play the move which loses on the spot, which was queen to f4.
Isn't that rook to e2, rook to e4?
Rook to e4 just wins here, yeah.
So rook to e2, yeah?
Rook to e2, and with the idea of rook to e4, yeah. And you can play f5 here to stop it, but white continues with rook to e3, which is a very important move. And then basically sacks a knight on h5. And that rook is coming into g3, queen on h5. White's attack becomes devastating. It's not obvious to the human eye, but I think that if you play queen f4, kind of rook e2 comes to mind, and then this is the moment when you start to realize that things are probably getting too dangerous for black.
Yeah.
So you gotta play the correct move, d takes e5. Obviously, a move which cannot be bad. It would be if this move is bad, then the position is bad, basically. Yeah. So he played it, and here Ding played a move which was criticized by a lot of people. I was watching the chat and all that. It was even called a blunder. I have a feeling that it's actually preparation.
He played it very quickly. He played this move d5 extremely quickly.
I think it's probably prep because white has two moves, and the computer sort of says knight e4 is the best move, and d5 is a bit inferior. But with time, engines also start to realize that both moves are basically equivalent. The difference between them is that knight e4 is more direct, and d5 is giving black a bit more choice. And as we know, that choice can actually be sort of a pain in the neck for black to deal with.
Yes.
So knight e4, I think probably queen f5, although queen f4 is also possible. And here probably f3, because white has a draw with knight d6, queen f6. And the commentators were saying maybe, we'll see a draw like this, but white can also continue f3 and then king to g7, obviously to get the rook to h8, and then probably d5. By the way, f3 was the idea, g4, rook h2, of course.
Yes.
And king g7 and d5, and it's again a mess. Black has a million moves, white has a million moves. It's white is obviously taking huge risks because down material with damaged pawn structure. Black is taking tactical risks because queen on f5 is loose, the king is still in tactical danger. White has a passed d pawn, and all these. The knight on e4 is obviously a very powerful piece. All these factors make the position very unbalanced, but also objectively balanced.
Yeah.
Objectively, the position is equal.
Yeah.
Instead, Ding played d5, and I like the decision, especially if it's preparation. I mean, that would seem very logical to me, because playing it quick. I don't know if he played it quickly, but
he did. He played d5 after 1 minute, I think, or maybe even less. Now, there's a caveat to that, is that for e5, he spent around 15 minutes. So one move prior, when he played this move, e5, maybe he was calculating or trying to remind himself about the theory and how it looks like. But d5 was played very quickly.
It could be that he was trying to remember. The reason I don't think that I think it was still prep is because the move is equal. And usually if you're kind of like out of prep and starting to make moves quickly in such a complex position, you probably wouldn't randomly land on a move that is good.
Yes.
But I could be wrong, because it is also a very logical move, right? You're just creating a passed d pawn, kicking the knight from c6.
Mm-hmm.
So here black has, like, the choice is too big to say all the moves, but it's basically 5 moves that black has.
Rook f8, pin the pawn, knight e7, which he played, right?
Knight a5, and
Knight
e takes
a5.
e5.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but after each move, white has a big choice, and then after that, after each white move, black has a big choice. So
yeah. We're not going to be able to cover everything.
the position never ends. And not only that, each move seems to be playable. Like, there are very few bad moves. It's only when you get later into the lines, when it becomes a bit more clarified, that suddenly there are bad moves. So if he had prepared this with white, he would have had to be ready for a lot of black's options, or just be very confident that he'll figure his way through all these complications.
I have a feeling this is one of those opening situations that's going to be analyzed in depth and also discussed in depth in a lot of high-level games in the foreseeable future. Just because, as you mentioned, there are so many options for both white and black at every corner.
So I think you're right that it will be analyzed in depth, and then I think that it won't be played at all.
You don't? Okay.
Yeah, I think the reason why is because for one game, when it's a surprise, this is certainly a very interesting choice. But once it's no longer a surprise, white has to be ready for any of black's moves, and black just has to pick one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're playing it for white, you just have to be ready for more. So it doesn't really make much sense once it's a known and analyzed variation.
From white's perspective, okay.
Yeah, from white's perspective. And black players who analyze it with black, they'll just, after d5 or after knight e4, they'll just remember like one straightforward line, pretty much. Because in fact, black seems to have more choice than white does. And there will be no point to playing this with white.
Yeah.
Because you can't really target your opponents here.
It just reminds me a lot, since I'm a Grunfeld player, of all those h4 Grunfelds. h4, h5, sack a pawn, and those variations can go for like 30 moves deep.
Yeah.
And then somebody comes up with a novelty at move 30 first, yeah, and things of that nature. And then the discussion continues for a very long time. But yes,
yeah,
you might be right about it. You might be. This is a bit more straightforward than those particular lines that I'm thinking.
I think the difference is just the time period we're in. It's because those lines that you're talking about, they were very heavily discussed at a time when computers were a little bit, I think actually maybe not a little bit, but a lot weaker, and where they didn't basically just show the answer immediately.
Yeah.
And now, if you analyze this for like an hour, you'll probably find all the secrets of the position.
Cool. He played knight e7.
So, knight e7, yeah. The thing about knight e7 is it's kind of forcing white's hand, although Ding thought a lot at this moment. And the reason why he thought a lot is because, okay, there's like 2 moves that come to mind, I think. Knight e4 and d6. And knight e4 is super dangerous for black, but it also ends up being better for black.
Mm-hmm.
And so probably he was trying to figure out these lines.
Yeah.
Knight e4, queen f4, and then after f3, white would be winning with g3, but there's knight to f5. It stops g3, and it threatens knight to e3, and basically things just don't work out for white, and it's actually winning for black.
Yeah.
And similarly, after queen f4, there's bishop to d3, And here black has a very important tactic because, again, white is threatening g3 and kicking that queen around to places where it doesn't really want to go.
Yes.
But black has the tactic bishop takes c4. g3, queen f5, and the trade of bishops will occur, and black is probably better, although maybe white is still in the game somehow, but it's definitely not what white wants to go for.
Right. So he played d6.
Again, black has like abundance of choice here, but I don't think that moves like rook a to d8 really come to mind because they are also involve piece sacrifices like queen a4, and black has to sacrifice one of these pieces. So Jan played knight to f5, which is, to my mind, the most natural move. Obviously, a trade of knights would lead basically just to an immediate loss for black, because white's knight on e4 is super crucial for any sort of compensation, for any sort of attack. Without the knight on e4 to kick the queen away, black's queen just stays there and protects the king forever.
Yeah.
So you need to kick that queen away. So knight e4. Queen to d8. So the reason for queen to d8 is if the queen goes to g7, and obviously it has only 2 safe squares to go to, then white plays g4, bishop to b7, bishop to g2, and black needs to have the queen attacking the pawn on d6. And also the queen on d8 facilitates stuff like knight to h4. So that queen on d8 is very important for covering the h4 square and for covering the d6 square.
Yeah.
Queen on g7 doesn't do that, and here white would win a piece, although it still remains a mess. Even after white wins a piece, it's very complicated, but not what black wants to go for. So queen d8. Here, I think Ding thought for a long time, but he found probably the most critical path for white. Although white has, again, an abundance of moves, which I don't think we can get into. It's just too many moves, like rook d2, queen e2, basically.
Yeah.
Million moves. So he played g4, obviously the first move you calculate.
Queen d3 first, right? Queen d3 first, king g7, and now g4.
He started with queen d3.
He started with queen d3, yes.
Okay, yeah. This can transpose. And so he played queen d3 first, threatens queen h3.
Yeah.
The way it could transpose is if g4 on move 19, then bishop to b7.
Yeah. And
queen
now
to
queen
d3,
d3.
And now king g7, and we reach the game position.
Yes.
So he played queen d3 first, king g7, with the idea queen h3, rook h8, defends against the checkmate on h7, and wins the game as well. So white cannot go for that. So g4, attacking the knight. If the knight goes to h4, then g5 comes. And then if the knight goes to f5, here there's a very important move, although it's already easy to tell that the pawn on g5 is very, very dangerous for black, because it allows knight f6 stuff, but here f4 just wins. And the point is the other rook is coming into the game. That rook on a2 that we mentioned, it might someday come into the attack. Well, it eventually did.
It arrived.
Like 12 moves later, it
finally arrived.
So after f4, and we'll see this theme come again and again, the rook would come to h2 and mate black, basically. Yeah. So that's why after g4, he played the move bishop to b7, which is a forced move. You can't move the knight, but you can indirectly defend it, because if you take on f5, e takes f5, the knight is pinned to the rook on h1, and this doesn't work out for white.
Yeah.
So after bishop to b7, Ding found the probably correct move, although there is a move d7 here, but I like Ding's move much more, and that's move rook to h3. And it's a logical move. It's basically just threatening the knight on f5 by getting the rook out of the way. And the reason it doesn't go to h2 is twofold. First of all, the rook goes to h2, black can play knight h4, and very often has knight to f3 tactics. So the rook on h3 covers that square. The other thing is that the rook on a2 very often wants to come to h2, so that's why white plays rook to h3.
You're fighting for the same squares, yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Very good point. Rook to h3, and now knight to h4 was played by Nepo. He has to do that, it seems like.
No, he has a choice here.
He does. Oh, wow.
It's again a wide choice. And Jan mentioned one line after the game here. He mentioned bishop takes e4 immediately.
Yes.
Queen takes e4, and here he mentioned the move queen takes d6.
Queen takes, just sacrifice the piece.
Yeah, he said you just sack the piece, and probably it's good for black. What he kind of overlooked, which I think it's basically impossible to find this. It's okay. The first move you can find, rook d2, queen to c7, but again you don't take on f5. You can, but black is doing okay. And the rook h to d3. I don't think in a million years you find this move. And the reason why you're threatening rook to d7. So first you want to trade rooks on d8, and then you take the piece finally on f5. So it's
But what
things
if
like
the
this,
knight
which,
goes to d4? What if I
yeah,
go
you can
knight
sack it
d4?
this way, but the white probably has a better version of the piece sacrifice because the queen on e4 remains on that square, so it doesn't get kicked around.
Mm-hmm.
But it remains very complex there.
Yep.
But probably white is better. So Jan mentioned a very relevant line, but it's not really surprising that he didn't see this rook d3 because I don't think Ding would have found it. Well, he might have. I can't judge for sure, but it's certainly a very difficult thing to find.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, after queen takes e4, the move knight takes d6. And then it kind of forces queen takes e5, f6, queen draws back to h2. Obviously, white is positionally lost, but tactically it's very dangerous for black because you can't trade rooks on h8.
Mm-hmm.
And Robert Hess was very proud when he spotted this line in advance. And they were even discussing the position knight f7. And the point of knight f7 is rook h7, king g8. And white has no way to check the king anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's no rook h8 check.
Mm-hmm.
But this position just remains a mess in like a million ways. And white can play f4, white can play bishop g2. It's just never-ending stream of moves. But I can understand why black would not want to go for this, for sure. For me, like the best move for black, even though all moves are sort of equivalent objectively, the most practical move is a move rook to h8. And I think Anish also mentioned, or this was even Tanya's idea, rook h8, sacking the piece.
Rook h8 after what move?
On move 21 after rook to h3.
Got it.
Black just gives up the knight on f5.
So instead of knight takes d6, just rook to h8.
Well, instead of bishop takes e4.
Bishop takes e4, excuse me, yeah.
Move 21, rook to h8.
Yep.
And Tanya mentioned this, and Anish liked it a lot. It's basically, yeah, you just sack, you get rid of any threats on the h file, and then you sack the piece, and then you count on having a bunch of pawns for the piece. And it turns out to be like very, very practically difficult for white. Very dangerous for white, in fact, to me it seems.
Yeah.
But you have to be ready to sack a piece. So it's not easy. It's a very tough decision. Instead, Jan played the move knight to h4, and I feel like this was the start of his difficulties. Knight h4, I know why he wanted to play it. He wanted to play it because it's a forcing choice, and in these positions you kind of want to limit the amount you have to calculate, so you want to go for forcing options. And it's also the first move that comes to mind. But Ding played g5 here, and it turns out to be a very dangerous position for black. So first let's get into how black loses with knight f5.
Sure.
Knight f5 here, and now f4 wins. And we saw this idea before. The rook goes from a2 to h2. And if bishop takes e4, you don't take back on e4 because you actually don't have time to. You play rook to a to h2. If you take that queen on d3, then check, check, and checkmate on h7. Very important you played rook h2 before capturing on e4 because black doesn't have rook h8 here. Rook to h8, rook takes h8, queen takes h8, rook takes h8, bishop d3, and rook takes a8. And so all these lines after f4 end up being completely winning for white.
And even in this position, it would be fine if after bishop to f1 you didn't have the move d7. Like if you would have to take on f1 and allow knight takes d6 or something along those lines, this endgame maybe is survivable for black. But you have d7, which promotes, and that's pretty much game over.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why knight f5 is bad. The only move to survive after g5 is the move rook to h8. And here it leads to a mess. And I think they were kind of analyzing this stuff in the broadcast. Queen to g3, bishop takes e4, queen takes e5. There's also rook h4 as an option. f6, queen e4, fg5. And we've kind of touched down a position where it's clear that black is not getting mated anymore. The king is suddenly safe. But on the other hand, white still has the d pawn. Material is very close to equal. Black's pawn structure is also rather damaged at this point. So the position is unclear. It's not better for one side or the other. It's not easy to predict what would happen if this had been played. We can only speculate. You know, maybe black has better practical chances. Maybe white does. Who knows? It's a complex position.
Yeah.
But Jan did not go for that. He instead, after g5, he made a losing move. And incidentally, I was watching the broadcast from the FIDE channel as well, and it was while the chess.com guys were analyzing knight to f5 on move 22, or rook to h8, Dubov and Irina Krush, Daniel Dubov and Irina Krush, were analyzing the move that Jan played before he played it because they felt it was very natural. And that move was bishop takes e4, queen takes e4, and knight to f5. So basically, you stopped knight to f6 ideas before retreating the knight, and if f4 here, it no longer works because now black is in time to play queen takes d6, rook h2, and rook to h8. Or, in fact, not rook to h8. Rook to h8 is somehow rook d3 or something I'm seeing, but rook f to d8, and the king escapes from f8 to e7.
Run with
I didn't
king.
even realize this was the idea, but apparently here black is getting better. Rook h7, king f8, and the king on e7 becomes completely safe.
Yeah.
None of this is obvious.
Yeah.
But after knight to f5, here Ding instantly made the winning move. Maybe it was the move which Jan missed. Maybe it was the move which also the commentators missed. I think Ding, he didn't see it immediately. It's because he was calculating while Jan was thinking, and he was probably calculating this bishop before queen knight f5 stuff.
Because it's the most natural continuation.
He figured out, yeah, it's very natural, and he figured out that White's correct move is rook d2. Did he know that it's a winning move? I don't know, but he figured out that it's the best move. Sometimes you see that the move is right, but you don't know 100% it's winning, but you just see like, well, I don't see what my opponent plays, so I might as well go for it, right? And let him figure out how he holds on. First point. White is threatening queen takes e5. And also f4, so not dropping the d6 pawn.
Yeah.
And if black plays queen takes g5, now queen takes e5, f6.
Queen f6 falls for rook to h7. I think it's
queen f6 loses to rook to h7, typical tactics, king h7, queen f6. f6, queen to h2, and rook to h8. It looks like black is stopping the checkmate on h7 and h8 and so on. But white simply takes everything on h8. King takes h8, d7 comes, and the pawn is unstoppable. There are no checks in the position for black, at least no meaningful checks. And white will just be a rook up, and that's it. That's the end of the game.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that in like the similar position, if white had taken on e5 on move 24 instead of rook d2, black would have had this whole rook h8 stuff. And in fact, black's queen is very much needed on d8 to be able to recapture on h8 with the queen.
Yes.
The queen on g5, although it looks active, it actually ends up just being out of the game while the d pawn promotes.
Yeah. Cool.
So Jan found the best chance after rook to d2. And the best chance is rook to h8. And I think he played it relatively quickly, and probably because he realized that rook h8 probably loses, but at this point I just have nothing else. I just need to play it quickly and hope that Ding doesn't find whatever win there is here.
He did spend about 8 minutes. He went from 39 minutes to 31 minutes. Maybe at this point it was some sort of a realization moment. Like, okay, I'm sort of busted. Maybe I did miss this move rook to d2, but now I just basically have to fight as best as I can with the tools that I have at my disposal. So how was Ding winning right now?
Okay, so two very clear ways, and some other ways which might be winning, might not be. So let's go through the clear ways. So first there's the move d7. And I think that this is what Anish was mentioning as a very natural move. Basically, before taking on e5, you just want to put your pawn on d7, and you're saying, you can't get rid of this pawn. And the trade of rooks, although it kind of helped black avoid mates on the h-file, the rook was also an important defender of that d-pawn. So once those rooks get traded, the d-pawn becomes more powerful because it has less blockaders. And of course, the queen is not a good blockader. So here after d7, black has only one logical move. Because if you lose the e5 pawn, basically everything starts to fall apart, and the d pawn will probably promote. So black has to play queen to c7. And at first, everything looks good for black in this position. It looks like rook takes h8, rook takes h8. You cannot take e5. The d pawn, although very dangerous, is not promoting immediately, and probably black is completely fine. But here, after queen c7, there is a winning move. Not an obvious move, but I think if you see the geometry, then it might come to mind. And the move is queen to h1.
Ooh, that's
Yeah,
nice.
first you would have to actually like envisage that this move exists.
Yeah.
Why is the move winning? The threat is pretty simple. Imagine black plays, I don't know, rook 8
Rook
d8.
a8, yes.
Rook h8, rook h8, queen h8, king h8, d8. Standard deflection stuff, and we are up a rook, we queened our pawn, and it's game over. And if rook takes h3, queen takes a8. And we see similar things if rook to h8, white will make a queen on d8 and be up a rook.
Yes.
And otherwise, white would even be up a queen. So this doesn't work out. If the rook on h8 moves anywhere, then white starts with rook h7 check and all that.
Yes.
So for example, rook f to d8, rook h7, king f8, rook h8, king e7, and queen takes a8.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of geometry, but it's if you see queen h1, you could probably spot all this geometry. Black has like probably the best chances, like knight d4 here, and it still remains like white still has to do work here to win, because obviously white will be up a piece, but black is hoping to get a bunch of pawns for it. And
the d7 pawn,
yeah,
most importantly, doesn't promote.
it turns out probably that black is, once he's down a piece, getting mated on the h file, and the computer here starts with the weird move rook h6.
Yeah.
But yeah, whatever. Basically, it's clear that white should be winning, although work remains to be done.
Yeah.
So Ding after rook h8, he didn't play d7. He played rook takes h8, queen takes h8. The point of queen takes h8 is king h8. It's very simple. White plays d7 with the threat of queen takes a8, and then rook to b8, queen e5, king moves somewhere, queen takes b8.
Mm-hmm.
Typical tactics we've seen, right?
Yeah.
White ends up a rook in the endgame. So that's why Jan played absolutely forced with queen h8. And here, if queen takes e5, it is surprisingly not easy for white to find a continuation after king g8, and white probably just isn't better anymore.
Yeah.
So there aren't a lot of natural moves in this position that are either not winning or make the task much more difficult. Queen e5 is one of them, and the move which Ding played is another one. It's a move which is probably winning, but makes the task much more difficult. Here he had a winning move, and I was kind of commenting online, and I sort of said that this move was difficult. It seemed difficult to me before it was played, and basically everyone after knight to f5 rook d2 on move 24 was calling for the victory. Like everyone was saying, okay, it's game over. But I kind of saw that after rook h8, which is what I felt Jan would go for, that it's not easy, because it's not like you're winning. You're winning because of some tactics, and although the computer spots them instantly, from a human point of view, you have to calculate a lot.
Yeah.
And you also have to make moves which are sometimes not obvious, but I think the biggest pitfall for white is that there are a lot of attractive looking options, and you could be distracted by those attractive looking options. It takes your attention away. Like if you have one straight line, it's like, let's say every move was absolutely obviously not good except for the winning move, then I think Ding probably just spots the winning move. But when you have a lot of good looking options, it really distracts you, and you might not even calculate. Like you might, let's say you have your list of candidate moves after queen takes h8. First candidate move, queen takes e5
Queen
check.
takes e5. Yeah, that's the main
You discard
one.
it.
Yeah.
Second candidate move, d7. Obviously, you push your pawn with
Yeah.
the threat of queen takes e5. And then you calculate this. It looks good enough for your for what you're looking for, and you don't calculate any other moves. And that's why you might not spot the move which wins on the spot, basically forces resignation. Move rook to d3. That's actually what I suspect, that basically Ding calculated queen e5, then he calculated d7. d7 looks good, and he played d7. If maybe d7 had not been winning at all, if maybe d7 had been a bad move, like obviously bad, then Ding would have started calculating the third option.
He forces himself to go into a better variation. Yeah.
Yeah, he would force himself to find some sort of resource in the position, and then his eye would have come upon the move rook to d3.
And it's also worth mentioning that at this point, he had 25 minutes. I think he did say it in the press conference as well. And we know what happened in the previous game. Whenever he dropped down to his last couple of minutes, he froze. So that was a huge problem, probably something lingering in his mind as well. with 25 minutes still about, at this point we're at move 25, so 15 moves to go until the time control, you start thinking about these things. Okay, I have to make my decisions and I have to make them faster than I've done it in the previous game. So perhaps this type of situations he was playing in his mind as well.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. And I think he even mentioned something in the press conference about how he was trying to avoid time trouble or something to that effect. Yeah, it gets in your head and you're like, okay, I just need to play faster. The problem is, of course, you don't know when, like nobody knows because nobody's telling you when you need to spend the time and when you need to.
That's the problem with chess.
No, yeah, that's actually a big problem. A lot of it comes down to intuition.
Yeah.
But the thing is, of course, your intuition may very often tell you play d7 quickly, and you might actually be correct most of the time. In this case, although I have to say d7 is not a bad move, it is a bad move in the sense that it keeps the game going. It gives black hope. Rook d3 snuffs out all hope. So why rook d3? It's pretty simple in terms of the threat, rook to h3. What's a little bit surprising is that black is completely helpless to deal with the threat of rook to h3. And if black's rook was on d8 here, black would have time to play king to g8, rook h3, queen g7.
So let's say I go rook to d8, a4. And now you said king to g8?
Yeah, you make some random move. Well,
rook
king g8 is one. There's in fact...
And there's no rook hanging on a8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you play king g8 after rook d3, you just blunder a rook.
Yeah.
Same with king to f8 and so on. And also the same with a move like queen to h2. If white was not taking that rook on a8, this move would actually defend against the rook h3 threat. You would put the queen on f4, and if that rook was not hanging, if it was on any other square, this works out for black. So black is simply not in time. Black is one tempo away from being able to both deal with the threat of rook h3 and deal with the hanging rook on a8.
Yeah.
If you play rook to d8, rook to h3, there's actually so little to calculate after rook to d3 that if you see it, I think basically you played it within 30 seconds.
It's easy after that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you just have to see it.
That's it. I mean, maybe the last thing you figure out is queen rook h3, queen g8, queen e5, king f8. Although at this point it's already clear that that something has gone wrong, and then you easily spot rook h8, and that's it.
Yeah.
So the only reason he didn't play it is because he simply did not spot the move whatsoever.
Yes.
No other explanation.
Yes.
And the reason he wouldn't spot it is because he basically stops his calculation after d7. This is there's this classic book by Kotov, right? Think Like a Grandmaster, which I think first postulates the tree of candidate moves.
Yes, candidate move tree. Yeah.
And the problem with this tree is that it doesn't deal with the real world situation, which is very often that you don't immediately see candidate it's very easy to say, okay, candidate moves are check, captures, and moves which create threats, right? But you don't very often spot candidate moves until you've gone through your analysis process. For example, I analyze this one move, and then similar to the game where Ding played d5, maybe d5 is not a candidate move, but then you analyze some similar variation, you get to the end, and then you logically realize, oh, there's one issue with this whole variation. And so now I need to go back to the very beginning, restart my candidate move process to kind of filter through what now logically makes sense with the new information I have about the position. So it's not as simple as you see the candidate moves before you and then you calculate through them one by one, right? In practical chess, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
But okay, getting back to the game.
Yeah.
Dick played the move d7, which is also a winning move, just not as winning, not as simple. Rook to d8. Obviously, threats were queen e5 and queen takes a8, so d7. Rook to d8 here. Obviously, black has to blockade that pawn and stop queen takes e5 threats and so on. Queen takes e5. At this point, if black were able to, let's say, play king f8, e7, then, white is only winning this tempo move by move, based on, based on very concrete details, not because white has any positional advantage, but just because, okay, concretely, it's good for white. Queen e5. King h7. And again, if the king could go to f8 and e7, that would be amazing for black. But king f8, queen h8. So again, it's based only on concrete details. King h7. Ding wants to play queen c7 now, but he doesn't want to allow queen takes c3. So first he gives a check on h2. And now if king g7, which is what was played, then queen c7. And if king g8, also queen c7. And now queen d8 would come with check. So king g7, c7. And the queen is on c7, not because it creates a direct threat, besides maybe to grab some pawns on the queen side, but because black's queen was threatening to come into play in some fashion, like queen h4 and so on. So you want to tie that queen down to the rook.
Yeah.
And here I was expecting the move queen to f8. I think this is what most people were expecting, and what Ding mentioned, like, you play queen f8 here, and obviously black is in a bad position, but it's not like, it's maybe even losing, but it's not, losing by force or anything.
Yeah.
But at least here, Ding would just probably calmly play king to d1, maybe queen a7, but king d1, queen e7, king c2, get the king into safety, then start to collect the pawns on the queen side, and he might have just won the game rather without much calculation if Jan had played this.
Yeah.
Instead, Jan played queen to h4. And the move loses. Let's say that straight away. He described the move as a bluff in the post-game press conference, but when pressed about his calculation process, he said that he thought queen h4 is a move which draws, and then later spotted that it actually loses. Like he said a minute later, basically.
Yeah.
Like he played queen h4, then he started to think on Ding's time, and he was like, oh, actually, after queen h4, my opponent can take on d8. But as a bluff, or a semi-bluff, or whatever you want to call it, it actually worked beautifully, because Ding did not take on d8.
So what's the variation after queen takes d8? Queen to e4, obviously you want to give a check. If bishop to e2, queen to h1, that's going to be a perpetual. So you have to go also king to d1, queen to b1, that's also a perpetual. So you have to play rook to e2. It's forced.
Yeah.
And now queen to b1. And now you try to escape with the king to d2. What's the critical variation in this line?
So I think after queen h4, basically the first three moves can be spotted within 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Which is queen d8, queen e4, obviously bishop e2 and king d1 are perpetual directly. Rook e2 is therefore forced. Any move which is not checked by black loses because white plays queen f6 and makes another queen.
Yeah.
So queen b1, king d2, queen to b2, or queen to a2 doesn't really matter, because after king to d3, which is the only move, black has only one check again, queen b1. White has only one way to avoid repeating the position, rook c2. And so you spot all this within 5 seconds. And then from this point forward, you start to calculate. If you don't stop. And Ding actually said he stopped. And he probably stopped not because of any chess reasons. Obviously, he understands that this would be a critical line to capture the rook and to try to escape the checks, but probably because he just trusted his opponent, and there was some psychological thing going on where he wanted to avoid time trouble.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that he would have avoided all time trouble if he had done this, because you calculate this, you can even spend all of your remaining time except for 5 minutes, and the rest of the moves, basically, they're all with check or they're forced, right? I mean, it's very straightforward. I mean, black has 2 checks here, besides queen c2, which is obviously ridiculous. There's queen d1, there's queen f1. So first queen f1.
Yes.
The king goes back to d2. Only 1 check. There is also a funny move, knight d6, but I think it's pretty... it threatens a mate on c4, but it's pretty easy to spot that, for example, white plays queen to h8, queen g8, or queen f8. Well, actually, queen f8 doesn't work, but queen h8, for example. King h8, d8 queen, and you take on d6, and you're up a rook.
Yeah.
And after king d2, queen f2, king c1, and it's pretty clear that once the king gets to b2, there are no more checks. And black is not down so much material, but white is simply making another queen.
Yeah.
Queen
f6 and d8 queen.
So queen f1 is easy to discard. Queen d1 is a lot harder. Now, I don't know, did Ding see queen d1 and discard it? It's possible. It could be that he just kind of said, okay, this is a draw, and moved on. Maybe he didn't believe that he was winning so easily, winning directly by force. But if he had continued his calculation, forced himself, then king to e4, he would have spotted this, and he might have seen that this is a winning position. And Jan mentioned that this was a winning position, basically.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, there's also knight d6, king e5, and knight to b7, but it's obviously desperate because it's no longer taking the rook on c2. And obviously the knight is going out of the attack as well. So queen c2, bishop to d3. And now you have finally stopped the checks of the queen. So if black plays queen takes f2, the problem is queen to f6 comes with check. And not only that, but the next move is also with check. And so white is promoting or taking f7 with check. And coincidentally also will uh, with mate very soon. Like white is going to be up two queens.
Hmm.
So queen f2 loses, knight d6 is completely forced in that case. And the thing is, I think at this point you basically like you just kind of figure it out because like you figure out that you have to do this because there's actually two moves. There's king to e5. A lot of people were making a fuss about king to e5. Um, but you can also play, as far as I understand, king to e3. And if queen to c1, then king to e2, and queen to b2, and king to f3. And the king escapes via f3, and again, white is simply promoting that pawn.
Yeah.
So black, it's not even about the material, it's just about the d7 pawn is promoting with queen f6 check. And after king e3, knight to f5, bishop takes f5. I don't think black has perpetual here. So then it's just coincidental that after knight d6, white also has another way to win, which is
King
even
E5.
more, yeah, even more brilliant and kind of funnier. And king e5, queen d3, queen f6, king h7, d8 queen. And the king looks checkmated on e5, but there's no way to do so. Knight c4, king f4, e5, king g4, and queen e4, king g3. And after all the million checks, the king escapes. And we could say this is a super difficult moment, but I think from a calculation point of view, it only comes down to one thing. I think it only comes down to, do you stop after queen to d1 on move 34, or do you continue calculating? If you stop, then you'll never find this.
Just to kind of put some context to this, we started this calculation at move 32. That was queen takes d8, and this is move 44. So this is 12 full moves or 24 plies, right? Which is kind of crazy. They are forced, but at the same time, there are so many ramifications along the way. And again, perhaps the time situation also playing in Ding's mind. He probably just gave up on the calculation a bit too early.
Yeah, I think it's really not about the amount of moves, because it's not the visualization. Like players who are not even close to as proficient as top players, like let's say very strong players, international masters, 2500 level grandmasters, they can play blindfold games fully. Of course, they can play even multiple blindfold games fully. Being able to visualize games that go 60 moves and so on. So it's not the visualization process. It's really, and I think like the first from move 30, queen d8, up until move 32, I think move 34, rook c2, I think it's relatively automatic. And I think queen takes f1 is kind of not difficult. It's really about the forcing yourself to continue calculating after queen to d1.
Yeah.
Like if you force yourself to continue, and you kind of either need to be very disciplined, or you need someone to tell you, yeah, force yourself. But you need to be disciplined, I think. So if Ding had a fully clear head, I think he would have been disciplined enough to play king e4, queen c2, bishop d3, and I think that at this point he just figures out the rest.
Yeah.
Because it's already clear that something went wrong for black. Like you start to have that feeling.
Yeah.
Like after queen d1, you might have that feeling, oh, this is a draw. But if you play king e4, queen c2, bishop d3, suddenly you have that feeling that knight d6 just doesn't work out because my king is somehow escaping. King e3, king e5, I'll start to see the possibilities that the king escapes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just about that one second in his calculation process, which is either stopping after queen d1 or going ahead with the calculation. And he said he stopped. So that was an important moment for sure.
Yeah. And he played king to d1.
Yeah, this is a move which changes the valuation dramatically. It's not like d7. D7 kind of wins, but in a less clear way. King d1 actually spoils the win. But as we will see, this moment was not the end of the adventures. King to d1 is very clear, stops queen e4. If queen e4, besides, I mean, the fact that probably bishop d3 is good, there's also king to c1. I don't know if he wants to play bishop d3 or if he wants to play king c1, but king c1 is the most clean-cut way to win.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jan played queen g5, which is of course correct, because even if your position is still bad, at least you got rid of the g5 pawn. At least you have a lot of things going for you with the black pieces now.
There's no more queen f6 in a lot of variations. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, endgames are much more attractive for black. You know, you're not getting mated for sure anytime soon. It's only about can white start to collect the queenside pawns.
Yeah.
So king c2. And out of any sort of queen g1 things, any sort of queen g4 things. Because if queen takes a7, then I think that queen g1 would have been super annoying. So king c2. Mm-hmm. The king is safe. That's the good news for white. Jan quickly played queen e7, and computer doesn't like this, but it's I think too difficult to understand what the computer is saying in this position. Queen to h4, some very strange stuff. Like queen e7, everyone plays, so
yeah.
Queen e7.
Bishop g2.
Bishop to g2, again, not a moment you can criticize because the computer says bishop to h3, but bishop h3 is far less logical than bishop g2. It's a very strange move. Bishop h3, knight h4, bishop g4. I mean, I don't understand how you can ever come up with this.
Yeah.
Also, there's a move king to b3, another move which, at first I thought the king is trying to march forward, but in fact the point of king b3 is not to march forward. The point is to avoid knight to d4 check, because after cd4, rook d7, queen goes to f4, cd4, rook d4, and there's no queen takes a3. You're just defending the a3 pawn. So king b3, bishop h3, like too difficult to my mind.
Not
bishop
realistic.
g2.
Bishop g2 makes a lot of sense.
What he played. Here, Jan had a golden opportunity, and I don't know how easy it is. Actually, I know it's very difficult, but I don't know how realistic it is, let's say, to find. Knight to d4 is somehow equalizing. C takes d4, rook d7, and you have to kind of see that queen to f4, cd4, rook d4. If white could keep the a3 pawn, then probably white wins this endgame because black only will have 2 pawns for the piece.
Mm-hmm.
But black has a nice tactic here. Queen takes a3, rook d7, queen to a4. And with 3 pawns for the piece, the position will be a draw because it's not even a material advantage for white. And you have too few pawns left. You just don't have enough to create winning chances.
Yeah. Yeah.
And similarly, if queen to e5 check on move 34, f6, queen moves to e3, rook d4, cd4, queen d4, queen takes a3.
Mm-hmm.
White can win the e6 pawn, but black will win the f2 pawn in the end. And the position is, again, objectively a draw.
Yeah.
So knight d4 was a drawing move. I mean, how difficult it is remains to be seen. I think Anish was kind of felt that it was quite findable, but certainly not an easy moment, and he didn't play it.
He played e5.
At e5, and Ding found the reputation of his move, which was bishop to e4.
Mm-hmm.
e5 is kind of logical. You want to play e4, e3, like you're creating counterplay. Ding recognized that, and he played bishop to e4.
Yeah.
Multi-purpose move. First of all, if white plays bishop takes f5, white just wins. And the reason why is because the less kind of minor pieces there are on the board, the less black has counterplay.
Yeah. And
specifically here, the d7 pawn is completely paralyzing 2 of black's pieces, the rook and the queen.
Yeah.
So if you can get rid of black's last active piece, it's amazing.
You can even start thinking about ideas of king b3, king a4, king b5, just collect the pawns with a king.
Yeah. And also black's king is more likely to wind up under attack.
Especially if you try to create some sort of counterplay with e4 later on.
Yeah, once the position opens with the major pieces on the board, and if the g-files open especially, black's king will come under attack. So Jan played knight h6, and I actually kind of predicted this move because it's the only move which came to mind to me. Mm-hmm. Computer doesn't like it, but I just don't see any other move being realistic. I mean, you want to play knight g4, f5, e4, something, some counterplay. Only move that I can imagine being played here. Mm-hmm. So, queen takes a7,
mm-hmm.
knight to g4. And here, white has a lot of good choices. And I don't remember exactly how much time Ding had at this moment, but
18 minutes.
18 minutes, and it's only for 6 moves. This is a moment where he really should have, I think.
4 moves, actually. We're at move 36.
Are we on move 36 already?
Yes. I think you missed a repetition at some point because you linked your game in ChessBase. I would assume that's how you analyze.
Yeah.
But there was a repetition. At some point, he played queen to h2, queen to e5 a couple of times to gain some time, which was in
Okay.
fact a very good thing for Ding, right? Very, very smart thing to do.
Yeah.
Gain a couple of moves, get closer to that 40th move. Move 36, 4 moves to go, winning position. What did he do?
So he made the move bishop to f3, and this is a really bad moment in the game. I mean, this is a moment where I can explain the thought process behind bishop f3, but still, it's like an elementary mistake, I think.
Mm.
And basically, he wanted to play bishop c6 in general because he wants to take on b6 without allowing rook d7.
Mhm.
But then he saw e4, queen takes b6, and he saw ideas like e3, and the knight on g4 is coming into e3, or he saw ideas like knight to e5, and the knight is coming into d3, and he got kind of worried about this stuff. It turns out that all of this stuff with knight e5, knight d3, although it remains complex, is objectively lost for black.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that if he had really wanted to be super subtle, if I don't think you need to be because bishop c6 is good,
Yeah.
then he could have found the move king to b3. And then if knight to f6, bishop c6, it's actually what he wanted, right?
Yeah.
So he wanted to provoke the knight to f6.
There's no
And
more
then-
95.
Yeah, and then e4, queen b6, there's no kind of knight e5, there's no e3 stuff, and so on. And the other thing is, if he had wanted to simplify the position completely, then he could have played queen takes b6, rook takes d7, what he's trying to avoid. But still, you take, and you take on c5. And this is not the cleanest way to win. In fact, it still remains quite a tough conversion task. But I think it's clear that white is on the much better side of it,
Yeah.
and probably objectively winning, and certainly practically very difficult for black to hold.
Yeah.
Because you're only up a pawn, but the bishop is stronger than the knight, and the pawns are threatening to move forward very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And white is also threatening f3, e5 will fall, and white is threatening simply king b3, b4, and once the king gets into the game, basically those pawns kind of just move forward effortlessly. The knight is not good at stopping, especially rank pawns, like
And now
A pawns.
finally the double C pawns actually act as a shield for white's king. So they're quite useful.
I think he would have seen like queen to a4 here. Kings goes actually both b2 and d2 are good.
Mhm.
But he was probably seeing like king d2, queen b3, or king b2, queen d1, and seeing some stuff which looks rather unclear.
Mhm.
The truth is that it's not really working for black.
Yeah.
But the fact that he had so many good options here, like he should have gone for one of them. King
Yeah.
b3, bishop c6, queen b6. There are even other kind of good moves like queen to c7, but I think you have like enough. Like queen c7 is also a very, very good option and a practical one because it forces knight takes f2, but a much better version for white compared to the game.
Yeah.
So what he did was bishop to f3. And what he wanted was knight to f6. He was thinking, okay, I provoked the knight to f6. Now I go bishop c6. Now e4. Now I take on b6. Now e3. Now I take on e3. And no counterplay for black.
Yeah.
And the problem with bishop f3 is that it's forcing black to do something. Like, obviously, Jan can quickly see knight f6, bishop c6. He kind of resigns the game very quickly here because he has no counterplay anymore, and he's losing b6. He's going to be down material. d7 pawn is remaining in the game. Like e4, queen b6, knight d7 doesn't win a pawn because queen c7, you lose a piece.
Yeah.
So this is pretty clear-cut calculation, and that's why Jan was forced, and he rather quickly made the best move, and the only move.
Knight
Takes f2.
Mhm.
Rook takes f2. You think, okay, I want a piece, but the problem is after e4, your bishop, which was on e4, safely blockading that e-pawn, is now getting completely shut out of the game. Because wherever that bishop goes, at some point black will have f5, and the bishop is actually behind a wall of pawns, and it just doesn't play a part in the game anymore. And white is simply not better after e4.
Yeah.
The other thing is that your d pawn is also just going off the board very quickly.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is difficult to figure out that this is the wrong direction. And as soon as knight f2 was played, I saw Ding, and he did not look happy.
Yeah.
He looked, in fact, extremely unhappy.
It was very similar almost to the previous game, where just one slip, one moment of not being attentive to what's happening in the position and what the options for your opponents are, one moment changed the whole outcome of the game. In that particular
Well,
case, one game ago, he lost. Now, from a winning position, just directly straight into a completely equal position.
I think in this case, one moment is not really. I mean, at this point, is one moment.
Yes.
But throughout the game, he did have, I think, 3 moments where if he had played a different move, the first one was rook to d3. If he
Yeah.
plays that, he wins.
Yeah.
It's a one-move win. It's not easy, but it's a one-move win. The second moment was queen d8. If he plays that, he wins the game, 100%. And the third moment was here, and I don't know which move exactly is like the most clean cut or clear cut, but I think if he makes either bishop c6, king b3, queen b6, or queen c7, his chances of winning are like 80, 90% depending on the move. I mean, very, very high winning chances.
Yeah.
Any of those moves. The move he played, his winning chances go to like 0 instantly. I mean, it's a really bad moment. There's no good way to say it.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the worst moments he's had in the match, and basically as bad as the last game where he lost a equal to better position in 3 moves.
Yeah, these are two really significant psychological blows. Forget about the score. He's still 1 point down, but psychologically, it's just so difficult to come back from like 2 devastating outcomes, pretty much, back to back as well. Like, and you're not getting a rest day this time. You got a rest day last time, so you could psychologically recover, come up with some interesting ideas. You don't get that right now, and you have to defend because you know Nepo is going to attack you with the white pieces next game.
Yeah, in terms of the match situation, it's bad for sure. I mean, any missed half point is bad, but also from the chess point of view, it's, I have to say, like, try not to be overly critical because the position after 36 knight to g4, it's not a position which to me is like obviously winning for white, but if you kind of calculate it out, then you kind of quickly see that certainly white is on the much better side of it. And even if you don't know that it's like +4 or whatever the engine gives with bishop c6, you can at least figure out that your winning chances are very high if you play bishop c6, if you play queen b6, and maybe other moves don't even come to mind, but other moves as well, like king to b3.
Yeah.
Bishop c6 is what Vishy mentioned, I think. E4, queen b6, and I mean, white still has to put the work in here. It's not automatic, but I think 90% he wins. Because at this moment, black is also going to have to find some really remarkable resources to hold on to the game. And yeah, bishop f3 was just a gift. There's no other way to put it. Like, Jan quickly snatched it up. Knight takes f2. Rook f2, e4. At this point, I was already thinking that it's very likely Ding loses this game because I saw a lot of strategic danger. And the strategic danger was connected to endgames, where black has 3 connected passed pawns, and white's bishop is stuck behind them.
Yeah.
And white does not have much counterplay on the queen side.
Yeah.
So, rook to e2, f5. Now we already see these pawns are dominating the bishop. And this was where Ding thought for the remainder of his time, it's move 39. He thought for the remainder of his time until he had 4 seconds left. And he played a good move. And this was a moment where I thought, like, it's 50-50 that Ding just loses this. Because I was envisaging that you could easily panic, low on time, and play bishop to g2. Queen takes d7. Queen takes d7, rook d7. Black only has 2 pawns for the piece, but black is on the verge of losing this endgame.
White.
And yeah, so if we can imagine that black puts the king on e5, like let's say white does nothing. Black's king goes to e5, black's g-pawn starts to march down the board, and then black's king goes to f4, and, you know, king g3 and so on. Basically, black's pawns at some point promote. Yeah. It takes a long time, but white's counterplay is not really connected to something obvious. So that's why I was worried. It turns out that even in this case, it's a draw, because the rook endgame after bishop e4, f e4, rook e4 is a draw, but it looks very dangerous. And the commentators were also saying that it's a very dangerous moment for Ding. The good news for him, as it turned out, was that he only had 1 move to time control. He didn't have to make like 3 difficult decisions. He just had to make 1. And he found a good move, queen takes b6.
And he spent around 5 minutes and 50 seconds. He started off with 5 minutes 56 seconds, as you mentioned, played his move with 4 seconds on his clock. Good decision by Ding. Queen takes b6.
D6 is a good move, and the point is if queen takes d7, which, by the way, the commentators were initially saying, doesn't this just lose on the spot, queen takes b6, like, because it looks like queen takes d7 at first either wins with like bishop moves queen d1, or if bishop doesn't move, you take the bishop.
Yeah.
Well, white has a very important move, rook, intermediate move, rook to g2, and completely saves the game based on this.
Nice
and
fight.
Just you attack g6.
Nice fight by Ding. I mean,
So after queen d6,
you can still consider this, right? Because you still have queen d3 check, for example, king b2, and offer the queen trade with queen to d6. Now we get the same endgame, but there's no more b6 pawn, which is a huge difference, because now my a pawn potentially could run down the board and create counterplay.
yeah, this position is a draw in a number of ways, but I would rather be black. I think that white is the one who either has to decide, do I take on e4, do I move the bishop and play against the 3 pawns?
So you would still take black, even without the b6 pawn?
Oh, 100%. In this position, the position we're looking at after 41, rook takes d6. Oh, sorry, it's 43, I guess, already.
43, yeah.
Rook takes d6. Yeah, 100% I'm taking black, although it's objectively a draw.
Yeah.
And white can play rook endgame, bishop b4, fe4. And yeah, white has a bunch of ways to draw. As we know, rook endgames are notoriously drawish. But when I look at the position, I see black has winning chances because black has 2 passed pawns and white has 1 passed pawn, and the doubled c pawns are not contributing as much to the position. But just because of the inherent drawish nature of chess, it turns out that this is a draw. Or if the bishop goes to e2, black has a very easy move, king to f6, followed by g5, followed by f4, and so on. White still draws this. So, but practically speaking, I think white is going to sweat this one out for a bit.
Yeah. Cool.
Rook d7 was played. And yeah, the draw was agreed shortly.
After queen to b8, queen to d6, and now we see a trade of queens. Bishop takes c4. Simplify everything, go into the rook endgame. I think the commentators were saying that maybe there's still some chance for Ding, given his extra pawn. There's no chance for Ding in this position. There's enough counterplay with the g pawn that black secures the draw.
Yeah, and the game was drawn.
Very nice.
And that was an exciting game.
What a game this was, I have to say. It was just, once again, back and forth. And we can easily criticize both of their moves with the engine. But without the engine, this game is so complex. There are so many things that have to be taken into consideration. There are so many variations that you need to calculate. You have to spot the exact moment where you have to spend your time. All of these decisions are not easy for the best chess players on the planet. And if you have watched this game with the engine by your side, with the commentators shouting that one or the other player should have found certain moves, of course, we have been critical at times as well. Forget about it. I mean, this game was so difficult for both of these players, and I could see it on their faces at the press conference. I have to say they both looked just exhausted, especially Ding. Of course, it's much easier for Nepo because he survived. For Ding, this was an exhausting game and is going to be taxing for the remainder of the night. Perhaps he's going to have a good support system that will be able to put him back on his feet, but I have to say this was a difficult moment for Ding. It's going to be very interesting to see how he deals with it.
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's not a good outcome for Ding. I mean, he really was very close to a win, and he had multiple chances to do so. And being able to continuously come back in the match, that would have been a real confidence booster. I'm sure every win is a confidence boost. And he has some good things. Like Anish was asked, what was the upside for Ding, and well, there's only one upside, which I guess is that you are creating winning chances continuously. In every game, you seem to be getting winning chances, which is a good sign, right? I mean,
it is. Yeah.
It's much more frustrating when you can't break through. it's a complete reversal of like every match. I mean, like, you know, nearly every game is decisive or nearly decisive, and like my match against Magnus, basically, we only had one or two chances, uh, basically two chances each in the match. Uh, so, and some of those were like one of those was kind of clear cut, right? Magnus in the first game completely crushing me, and I guess one was very clear cut in the end game that I had against him, where I was like mathematically winning, made in 60 whatever moves. But it was a very small amount of chances. We were really struggling. A lot of games basically ended in draws where neither of us had much,
Yeah.
or very very little.
Yeah.
This match is totally different. Like someone is winning each game, objectively winning at
So
some
many
point in each
chances.
game,
Yeah.
and very often both players have winning chances in single games, uh, which is also strange, right? I mean, it's surprising at least. Like in this game, even in this game where Jan was on the back foot for all of it and objectively losing at least three times, at least at three like separate moments, he still actually had some practical chances to win this game near the end of it. I mean, people
Incredible.
were talking about, especially with low time, that he was putting Ding in a dangerous situation.
I was looking at the position exactly the same. I thought that at that point, given the psychological impact that this whole swindle must have had on Ding in the moment, I thought that he's just going to collapse again.
It was definitely close, not from an evaluation point of view, but from a psychological point of view.
Yeah.
But still, he's not going to think of this game as I escaped. He's going to see the amount of places where he was losing. Oh, sorry, where he was winning, where Jan was losing, and he will see that he missed a bunch of very important chances. And in these matches, it's going to very often come down to one game or so. There's going to be some critical games, and you remember those like one or two moments, and it's like you're not going to be winning every game, even though he's creating chances. It's not possible that every single game he gets winning chances.
Yeah.
And we are coming to not the final moments, but this is already the second half of the match, right?
Yeah.
Definitely a moment where he's going to be wanting to take his chances.
Mm-hmm.
And that last mistake, bishop to f3, that he made, that last objective mistake in the game, is a very concerning one for his form. I mean, I think right now the rest of the match will be determined by nerves, by tiredness, and so on. Because, yeah, for sure they're exhausted. Every game is tough. They have no easy games in this match. They had maybe one easy game, which was like that game 3, right? That's the only game I can think of. Every other game was a
Yeah.
bloodbath, even this
Yeah.
one, which was a draw.
Yeah.
So they're exhausted. But bishop f3 is a really. I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. This was a very serious mistake from multiple points of view, from objective chess point of view, from the evaluation point of view. Yeah, I would, if I was him, I would mostly be, the two moments I would regret is, one, I didn't calculate queen takes d8 to its fullest. But what I would regret even more is that, why did I play bishop f3? I mean, I had so many good moves and I chose the one move which is not good.
Yeah. Fabi, we outdid ourselves once again. We're at 1 hour and 30 something minutes. So, guys, if you've made it up to this point, leave your comments in the comment section. Say, I've made it. I've gone through the whole recap. Hope you enjoyed it. We still have another video coming up today. We will be discussing the leak in complete detail because that is such an important facet of this match moving forward. So we'll be discussing that in another video. Check that out. Guys, see you tomorrow.